Hello everybody, today we are going to discuss Deep Water by William Douglas, and this is an autobiographical piece. Here William Douglas is telling us about his own experiences in water. Actually, he had two misadventures in water, and because of those two misadventures he developed a fear of water and avoided swimming, avoided going to water. But later on, with his determination, he was able to overcome that fear. So in this story, he is narrating all that, how he actually got that fear in his mind, how he overcame that fear, and in between whatever happened to him, whatever he did to overcome that fear. So all those things are being narrated here in this chapter. So the theme of this chapter is any fear can be surmounted, that is overcome, if one has that determination, if one has that strong will. So this is the main idea of the chapter, and the whole story is based on that. And basically, as I said, it's an autobiographical piece. The writer is telling us about himself. Now, how it begins actually. So the writer says that when he was 10 or 11 years old, he had decided to learn to swim, and he actually went to YMCA pool there. So there was a river named Yakima River, as I've given here. So there was a river named Yakima River, and there was a pool as well, YMCA pool. And what is that YMCA pool? It is Young Men's Christian Association. That's the full form of this. Now, but the Yakima River, that was treacherous. Treacherous means deceptive. And there could be, actually, why deceptive? So the reason was there could be high surge of water anytime, and people could drown in that. And his mother actually would keep fresh all those things in his mind. She would tell him about the drowning incidents there and what would happen there. And so he would be kept reminded of all those things. But he was not going to Yakima, he was going to YMCA pool, and that was safe. Now, how it was safe? It was 2 or 3 feet deep at the shallow end, and while at the other end it was 9 feet deep, but the drop was gradual. Now, what does that mean actually? It wasn't steep. It wasn't steep, it was just a gradual, that drop was in a gradual manner, and so there was no harm in that, and one didn't need to panic or worry about that. And we have a question on this as well, which has been asked in your board exam several times. Now, what is the question? So it is, how was the YMCA pool safer? So this has been asked in your exam, that how was the YMCA pool safer, or what reasons compelled Douglas to take decision in favor of YMCA pool. So what we have to answer, this 2, 3 feet and 9 feet thing, that is what we have to mention. And moreover, the Yakima River was treacherous. So these are the things we need to mention. Now what happened, he actually got or bought a pair of water wings. Now water wings, that keeps you afloat in the swimming pool. We tie a certain kind of thing that is puffed up with air, and that keeps you afloat in water. So he tied those water wings on his hand and then went to the pool. And now he is saying he disliked actually, I hated to walk naked into it, showing my skinny legs. He didn't like that at all. Of course, now when you have to go to the pool, definitely you must be in that swimming costume, and that you cannot go in that jeans and t-shirt. So he had to go, and he didn't like it because his personality, we can say, skinny. He was very lean and thin, and that's why he didn't like that. But then he had to subdue, that is subside his pride. He had to suppress his pride, and then he did it, because if he had to learn, he had to do that. Now here he is going back into the flashback, the early part of his life, and that was when he was 2 or 3 years old. So the writer here says that, however, right from the beginning, I had an aversion to water, and I have mentioned this thing here, that this California incident, that's what he is talking of here. So he says that right from the beginning he had an aversion to water. Now, aversion means dislike. So what happened actually, when he was 2 or 3 years old, his father took him to a beach in California, and they were standing there in the surf, and then there came a big wave, and it was really quite strong, and it just knocked him and swept him over, and he lay buried in water. His breath was gone, he was horrified, and father was laughing, father was enjoying that thing, he was terror stricken, he was very much afraid, and father actually was enjoying, because father just, okay, he was there to help him, and he took that in a light manner, but the boy, he was terribly fear stricken. So we have a question on this as well, and that is, how did Douglas develop an aversion to water? How did Douglas develop an aversion to water? So how did he develop an aversion to water? So the answer is that California incident. That is what we need to mention here in this, and that will be your complete answer. Now what happened, all those memories, when he went to the pool, all those memories, those childish fears, actually they just cropped up, they came up again, and in a little while he just became normal, and he gathered confidence, because of course in the beginning he was a bit afraid, but later what, he just got confidence. And then what, he tried to learn by aping the others. Aping, that is by copying or imitating others, and he was beginning to be at ease in water, and slowly and gradually, when he saw all others and when he was practicing, so he was beginning to be at ease in water, coming to normalcy, a normal state. And suddenly then what happened? The misadventure happened. Now how was that, and what was that? So he went to the pool when no one else was there. It was all calm and quiet. The bottom of the pool was as white and clean as the bathtub, means so clean and clear it could be easily noticed. But he was timid, he was a bit afraid. So he was timid about going in alone, and he waited for others to come. He was afraid, of course, that who would save him, who would help him. So he needed somebody's presence. So he just sat down there at the side of the pool, waiting for others to come, that if somebody would come, then he would start. Now he had not been there for long. Then what happened? Here you can see, these are the things, father was laughing and all those things that I just mentioned. So what, he just sat there, and he had not been there for long when in came a big bruiser of a boy. Now bruiser of a boy, that is hooligan type, we can say ruffian type, such kind of a person, a boy came, probably 18 years old. He was not more than perhaps 18 years, and he had thick hair on his chest, and was a beautiful physical specimen, was good looking, had rippling muscles, wavy muscles. So like, you know, the modern day or today's heroes and like Salman and all that. So he had those wavy muscles, and he came, and what he said, "Hi skinny, how would you like to be ducked?" So not just this, with these words, what he did, he simply just took him, just lifted him and threw him into water. And before he could understand anything, what happened? He was sitting there and landed in the same position. As he was sitting in the same position, he landed in the pool. And of course, he was frightened, because he couldn't understand. Before he could understand, all this had happened. So he was frightened, but not yet frightened out of his wits. That is, his mind was still working, the machinery was still on, everything was going on. So what? On his way down to the bottom of the pool, he planned. What? When his feet would touch the bottom, he would make a big jump. He would make a big jump, come to the surface, lie flat on it, and paddle to the edge of the pool. Simple. As simple as that. Yes, of course, there is no problem in planning. There is never any problem in planning. Problem comes in execution. You know that. So, what he also planned, but when it came to execution, what happened? Those 9 feet appeared more like 90. So that was the scene. Means it seemed like what? His lungs were ready to burst, as if that all busting and blasting would happen. You can imagine the pressure and all he must be having and experiencing at the time. And what? Then he had imagined what? He had imagined that he would bob to the surface like a cork, pop up, bob up at once, but no such thing happened. Instead, he says, he came up very slowly, very slowly. He opened his eyes and saw nothing but water. Yes, water with a dirty yellow tinge to it, shade. And he grew panicky. He tried to catch at some rope, but of course, how could there be any rope? There was no rope, so his hands only clutched at water. And what would he do with that? And he yelled, he screamed, he shouted, but no sound came out of water. And how would it be? Of course. And then his eyes, and then his nose, and not yet his mouth. Yes, the mouth was still under water. So here the writer is telling us all these things to suggest what? The process was that slow. Means he had imagined that he would bob to the surface like a cork, but instead of all that, instead of happening like that in that cork manner or in that quick manner, it was that slow that eyes were out, nose were out, but mouth was still under water. And so here we have another question, and that is, what misadventure did happen to Douglas at the YMCA pool? So what misadventure did happen to Douglas at the YMCA pool? So what we have to mention here is this bruiser incident, this ruffian incident, that 18-year-old boy, what he did, all that has to be mentioned here in this. Now what? I flailed, he's saying I flailed, that is I struggle, means just as we people call for help. So I struggle at the surface of water, swallowed and choked. Might have tried to drink all that water and just to empty it, but it couldn't happen. So just on the lighter side, so I swallowed and choked. I tried to bring my legs up, but they hung like dead weights, paralyzed and rigid. Yes, it was what? That his feet, it seemed as if all got paralyzed, all got rigid, as if some great weight was pulling them under. He tried to bring them up, he was trying, but as if he was all helpless. He was unable to command his legs, he was unable to move his legs, he was unable to do anything, as if had lost total control on them. And then what? I screamed. So yes, he screamed, but then who was there to listen? No sound, only water heard me. And then I started my journey down to the bottom of the pool again. So yes, he went to the bottom of the pool, and this happens thrice. So now in the later part of this, he is describing all that experience when he was moving up and down, up and down. So thrice this happened, and he has compared this with a nightmarish sleep. And nightmare, you know what nightmare is? Bad dream. And in bad dreams, in nightmares, we are helpless. The dreams, whatever is happening in the dreams, they are not in our control. So similarly, he was all helpless. Whatever was happening was not in his control. He simply went down, just striking with his hands and all, but he was unable to control the situation. And later what happened, he felt all giddy. Giddy is dizzy, means his head was spinning off and heart was pounding. There was throbbing and pounding, so that kind of sensation. But yes, in between all that, he knew, he remembered what? When my feet touch the bottom of the pool, I'll make a big jump and come to the surface and then lie flat and then thrash with my hands and legs and will come to the edge of the pool. So he remembered that strategy, he remembered, and yes, he was going down and there was that yellow water all around and nothing else. He couldn't see anything else, only that yellow water. Now why this yellow? He is repeating this yellow. So it's not that with his jump at once the water turned into yellow color. The reason is what? It was that fear. The fear made it appear like that. It was his fear that when you are fear stricken, when you are very much terrified and you close your eyes, it seems all that yellow light around you. So it seemed just like that. He was that much terror stricken, and what only the pounding in his heart and the throbbing in his head said that he was still alive. Otherwise, there was nothing about him that could tell us that he was still alive. And finally, amidst that terror, he was terror stricken. Terror had that sheer stark terror, that means the complete utter terror had occupied his mind. And amidst all that, amidst that terror, what happened? Came a touch of reason. Means at once there was something. He realized, he felt something. What? That his strategy, I must remember to jump. And yes, I was trying, means he says that he was trying to find some rope ladder or something with which he could get out of water, but there was nothing, only water, and water surrounded him, and it seemed like what? Great charge of electricity, as if he had some big shock, some great charge of electricity just struck him, and he wanted to call for help, he wanted to call his mother, but nothing happened, none came, nothing burst, nothing moved. And so this was the misadventure actually. And here also he is telling us all these thrice went up and down, as I just said. And then it is the post misadventure experience. Actually what happened when this happened, that like he was going down again thrice, third time he was going down. First he felt like yellow light was going away, and then he started going to the bottom of the pool again, and his legs felt limp or loose, lost all control. Blackness swept over his mind, means he was slowly and gradually getting transported to the zone of unconsciousness. That's what he's trying to explain here. So blackness swept over his mind, it was all quiet, his legs felt all limp, and it was something like he didn't have to do anything. All efforts ceased, nothing was to be done, no movement, nothing was to be done, all efforts ceased. And then what? He was floating there on water, and then tender arms like that of mother. Because why is saying so? Actually people have come to save him, and that's what he felt like, tender arms like that of mother. So people were there to save him, and then he crossed to oblivion. So here I have mentioned that thing, that finally he crossed to oblivion. So oblivion here is a state of unconsciousness, total forgetfulness. So he became totally unconscious, the curtain of life fell. So not permanently, it was all temporarily. And next I remember was, I was lying on the side of the pool vomiting. So actually what he had like drunk lots of water there. So as we discussed earlier, that swallowed, so tried to empty the pool, and now he was just vomiting out his the water in his tummy. So I was lying there on the side of the pool on my stomach vomiting, and the chap who threw me in, so the person, that hooligan sort of boy who threw me in, who threw his Douglas in, he was saying I was just fooling. Now, like just making some fun or something like that. And someone who was standing there, he said, fooling? The kid nearly died, He could have died in your this joke or in this pleasantry. And okay, now let's take him to the locker room. So, okay, now after several hours, when he went back home, when he returned home, he was weak and trembling. He shook and cried when he lay on his bed. Definitely that much afraid, that much affected he was. And he couldn't eat that night. At that time also he might be that shaking and all. And the fear was there with him for several days. Yes, it haunted him. It was there with him for several days. And the slightest exertion would upset him, making him wobbly in his knees and sick to his stomach. That means all would be shaky, and when the slightest, whatever he would do just for a bit slightly, and he would feel a wobbly sensation, that is shaky sensation. There would be a sickening in his stomach, that is the vomiting sensation. And so what? He never went back to the pool. He avoided water and he quit swimming. So this was the result, the impact of that incident, that misadventure. And this was not all. Now see what happened later. So because your heart is not in your control, it sometimes just jumps out of your control. And this is what happens whenever we see something good, we want to do that or enjoy that. So a few years later, when he came to know about the cascades here, C is in capital. So it means it is the name of something, some waterfall or so. Otherwise cascade means waterfall, but here as it is given in capital, so we can say it's used as a name. So when he heard of the waters at Cascades, he wanted to get into them, wanted to enjoy that. Quite natural when it is all drizzling and atmosphere is quite pleasant and good. We like to go for picnic, we like picnicking and all that. So he also wanted to do that, and whenever he did, as he's saying, whenever he did, whether he was wading the Teton or Bumping River or Warm Lake at the Goat Rocks, so these are just simple names, different names. Wherever he tried, what would happen? That fear would come back and it would grab his heart, and icy horror would seize his heart. It would like paralyze him. He would not be able to move or just take his steps further. Nothing. He would be totally in the grip of fear, totally paralyzed, unable to do or unable to move. So here the word is wading, and wading is simply going into water. That's what he is saying. And so this fear, this handicap, this weakness stayed with him as the years rolled by. Time passed, but the weakness was there, the fear was there. And in canoes, in fishing for landlocked salmon, or bass fishing in New Hampshire, or trout fishing in Deschutes or Metolius in Oregon, or in New Columbia. So these are just different names. He is telling us that wherever he went, wherever he went, that fear of water would follow him. Douglas moving ahead and the fear following him. It was like that, and it ruined all his fishing trips and deprived him of the joy of canoeing, boating and swimming. He would be unable, he would not be able to enjoy any of these things. It was all spoiled. The fear ruined everything for him. So here we have another question on this, that how did the misadventure at YMCA pool affect Douglas? So how did it affect Douglas? So you need to mention two things here. One is what? He never went back to the pool, avoided water, quit swimming. And two is it ruined all his fishing trips and deprived him of the joy of canoeing, boating and swimming. So these two things are to be mentioned here. And now he says he tried all the ways, all possible ways that he knew to overcome that fear of water, but he couldn't do anything. He was all helpless. It gripped him firmly, and so finally one October he decided to get an instructor. So yes, we have mentioned about all these things here. He hired an instructor, so decided to get an instructor. And what did the instructor do? Instructor just put a belt around him, his waist, a rope was attached to that, and that rope went through an overhead pulley, and the other end would be in the hands of the instructor. And they practiced, they swam just back and forth, hour after hour, day after day, months after months. So he practiced daily, an hour daily, 5 days a week. And in between or during the practice, when the instructor would loosen his grip on the rope and he would go down, that fear would come back. The fear would come back, and yes, he would again feel that terror, he would again be paralyzed, and so. And it was 3 months before the tension began to slake. And so it took him 3 months to overcome that fear that would again be there with him when that he would loosen the grip. So now what he taught him, how to raise his nose and inhale, and how to put his mouth under water and exhale. So inhaling, exhaling, he repeated the exercise hundreds of times, and slowly and gradually he shed the part of fear which would grip him when he would be in water. And now next, that part was over. Next, what he did, he just held me at the side of the pool. The instructor asked him, okay, now be at the side of the pool, and asked me to kick with my legs. Okay, that hand practice was over. Now it was the leg practice, and he asked me to kick with my legs, but what? First, my legs refused to obey. Refused. And of course, this happens with the beginners. What? When your hands, you move your hands, your legs don't move. When you move your legs, your hands don't move. So this happens with the beginners, but he says later I could command them as well. So now it was all proper. So when he had perfected each piece, so actually what, in this manner, in this way, piece by piece, he built a swimmer out of Douglas. And when he had perfected each piece, he put them all together into an integrated whole, and in April he said, now dive off the length of the pool, crawl stroke. So the instructor, his task was over. And here we have one long question, and that is, how did the instructor built a swimmer out of Douglas. How did the instructor build a swimmer out of Douglas? So the whole thing, the whole para which I just mentioned, so all these activities are to be included in this. Now what happened that, okay, the instructor, his task was over, he was finished, but he says, his task was over but not mine, I was not finished. Actually he had some fear. Okay, so far it was the instructor to save him, but now if he is gone, who would help him, who would save him? He feared what? That when he would be alone in the pool, that fear could come back. And so what? He tried and tested. He tried and tested, and then what? That tiny vestiges. He swam the length of the pool up and down actually, and the tiny vestiges means remains. So tiny vestiges of the old terror did return. Yes, it did return. And then what? I could frown, he's saying. And now actually he had got that guts and courage to scare the fear. And what? I could frown and say, hey, trying to scare me. He could say like that now to terror, trying to scare me. Now here is to you, and off I'd go another length of the pool. So he had got that guts, he had got that courage to do that. And this went on until July, this practice. In April, it took almost 6 months. October to April, you can count around 6 months. So it took 6 months for him to practice and learn all that. And until July, this practice went on in the pool itself, but he was not satisfied. He wanted to try it out some other places as well. And so what? He went to Lake Wentworth. And there, he dived off a dock from Triggs Island and swam 2 miles to Stampeck Island. So here you can see that we have mentioned all this, Triggs Island, Stampeck Island. So he dived off. And what? He just swam and practiced. He tried all the strokes. You know, there are different strokes in swimming. So he tried all the stroke, front stroke, back stroke, side stroke, breaststroke. All he knew, he tried all that. And yes, once did the terror return in miniature, mini form, just once, when he was in the middle of it and he put his face under water and saw nothing but bottomless water. So yes, at that point it happened that the terror was back, but now he was courageous enough. And so what? He laughed and said, well, Mr. Terror, what do you think you can do to me? What? Can you do something? What do you think? So that's how he faced the terror, and now the terror was gone. It fled, it ran away, it was gone, and he swam on, he continued. And now, strange enough, what he is saying, however, still I had some residual doubts, some remaining. Now, what a person he is. See, we are satisfied and still he is not satisfied. So, what he is saying, that residual doubt. And so what? At my next opportunity, I went up the Teton to Conrad Meadows, up the Conrad Creek tail, and then to Mid Glacier, and then camped at the side of Worm Lake. So these are just different names, and you don't have to remember these names because they are generally not asked in your exam and won't be asked. So just some names: Stampeck Island, Triggs Island. Okay, if need be, you can remember these names, but otherwise the other names that I mentioned, you don't have to remember these names. And now what? He from there, okay, he went to the Worm Lake and there he camped. Next morning he stripped. removed his clothes and dived off, jumped, swam to the other shore and back, just as Corpron used to do. Now, who is this person, Corpron? He was a swimmer and a doctor of his times. So, okay, he swam just like Corpron used to do. And he shouted with joy, Gilbert Peak, return the echo. That sound he has returned, it came back, he shouted. And he's saying, I had conquered my fear of water. Yes, the fear was gone. With his efforts, continuous efforts and hard work, he had conquered that fear. And so he is saying, this experience had a deep meaning for me. Now, to us as well, it has a deep meaning. So, the question here is, this experience had a deep meaning for me. Explain. So, what was the experience? The experience of trying and testing, or say the experience of overcoming his fear of water by trying and testing himself at different places. So, that fear he is talking of here. And why did it have a deep meaning for him? It had given him a lesson for life, that any fear can be surmounted, any fear can be overcome if you have the willpower to do so. So actually he had two misadventures in his life which affected him so much so that he avoided water, never went back to the pool, quit swimming and all. It was after that he was able to overcome this fear. So that's why it had a deep meaning for him. So this is what we have to answer here or write here. And he's saying only those can understand who have experienced it in the same way and overcome it. So he says death. In death there is peace. Actually one doesn't need to be afraid of death. In death there is peace. There is terror only in the fear of it. So important is what we need to think of, or what we need to consider is the element of fear. And he says, as Roosevelt knew when he said, all we have to fear is fear itself. So this too is quite important for us. All we have to fear is fear itself. So what does this mean? So what he is trying to say by this is, we don't have to fear at all. We should avoid this element of fear, because fear is nothing but an element of our own making. It exists nowhere except in our psyche, and it cripples our abilities and potentials, doesn't let us use our abilities, use our capabilities to the full. So we have to avoid this element of fear. That is what he is trying to say through this. And now he says, as I had experienced both, what? The fear, that experience of death and the fear that it can produce. So what the will to live grew in intensity, and now what? He could brush aside his fear, walk the trails, climb the peaks and do anything. So he had conquered his fear of water and he was able to do anything, he was able to enjoy anything. That's what he has to say here. That's how he is sharing his experiences of life and trying to tell us with determination, with willpower, anybody can overcome that element of fear. and you have some questions here at the back of the chapter. There are 3 questions. I would say the second and third one are quite important, have been asked in your exams and can again be asked. So along with all the questions that I discussed here in this story and chapter, these 2 questions given at the back of the chapter are also quite important, and you must prepare all these questions. So that's it about deep water. Thank you very much.